He told me I was banned from my own lodge. I didn't scream. I called my lawyer. Stay to hear the one sentence that changed everything. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. And please, tell me in the comments, from which city are you listening today? I love knowing where my words are finding a home. My name is Rebecca Hale. I am 67 years old, a widow, born and raised in Denver, Colorado. For the past 3 years, since losing my husband Richard, I have found my quiet joy not in crowds, not in travel, but in one simple place, our family mountain lodge outside Aspen. We built that lodge with our own hands. Richard cut the beams, I painted the window frames. Together we sanded the porch railing until it felt like silk under our palms. It was more than a house. It was memory nailed into wood, love pressed into stone. I never drove up there empty-handed. In my weekend bag I always carried a chipped ceramic cup, Richard's cup. The rim cracked years ago, but he never let me throw it out. It survived a fall, he told me once, turning it in his hands, and that makes it stronger, not broken. That cup became my anchor. Every time I held it, I felt like Richard's warmth still lingered. The drive from Denver to Aspen usually took 3 hours, and it used to feel like nothing. But that particular afternoon, every mile felt heavier. I remember the highway winding through pines, the mountains rising steady like witnesses. My fingers clutched the steering wheel tighter than usual, as though I already knew something was waiting for me. And then I saw it, the roof line of the lodge peeking through the trees. Relief should have washed over me. Instead, I heard something that stopped me cold. Laughter. Loud, careless laughter spilling out from the porch. I froze halfway up the steps. My heart pounded in my throat. That was Richard's porch, our porch, and yet the sound didn't belong to me. And there they were. My only son, Daniel, sprawled across Richard's old rocking chair, the very one he had sanded smooth one summer. His ankle tossed over his knee, a glass of wine in one hand, his phone glowing in the other. Beside him sat his wife, Lydia, legs crossed like she was posing for a magazine, her manicured hand circling the rim of her glass, and with them, her parents, Charles, with his silver neat hair, and Elaine, pearls tight around her neck, leaning back as if they had been born into that porch. 4 wine glasses, 4 bodies at ease. On my porch. In that moment, time split in 2. In my mind I saw Richard, a crisp autumn morning, steam curling from his tea as he smiled at me and said, "Becca, this will always be the spot where I wait for you to bring me tea." And then the present slammed over me, Daniel filling that sacred space with a smirk. He looked at me without flinching. His voice was calm, steady, rehearsed. "Mom," he said, "you are not allowed here anymore. This is their house now. It belongs to Lydia's parents." Every word landed like a stone on my chest. My knees felt weak, my throat locked. I saw Richard's chair, Richard's porch, Richard's lodge, and my son, our only child, giving it away with a shrug, as though decades of sacrifice were nothing more than another glass of wine. That sentence, "You're not allowed here anymore," split my life into before and after. I tightened my grip on the bag I carried. Inside, the chipped cup pressed against the fabric, solid, unbroken. My lips curved into something that might have looked like surrender, a slow, deliberate smile. But in my heart, I had already written the ending, because Daniel didn't know the truth. The lodge wasn't his to give away. Richard and I had made sure of that years ago, and if you stay with me, I'll show you how silence can sometimes become the sharpest blade. The drive back to Denver felt longer than 3 hours, as if the road had been unspooled just for me, and I was condemned to measure it inch by inch. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call a friend. The only sound in the car was the soft rattle of a chipped ceramic cup in the passenger seat. The cup Richard used every morning. The crack along its rim caught the late sun and flashed like a thin, stubborn vein of silver. I kept one eye on the mountains in the rear-view mirror until they faded into flat land, the way a life recedes when you stop looking behind you. When I finally pulled up to my pale blue house, the porch light flickered twice before it steadied. I stood in the entry, bag at my feet, keys still in my hand, and felt the quiet push against me. It wasn't just a lack of noise. It was a presence. I set the cup on the hall table like a relic and walked to the kitchen because kitchens forgive you for not knowing what to do next. Lavender cleaner and old paper. That's what my house smells like. I took down a kettle, filled it, and set it on the burner. Muscle memory did the work. While it heated, I took the lockbox from the pantry and placed it on the table. The key had hung on the same nail for 40 years under a little carved heart Richard made when we were too poor for fancy hardware. I unlocked the box and laid out the folders like cards: deed, insurance, taxes, living trust. There it was, our careful handwriting, the emboss raised just enough for my finger to find it even with my eyes closed. Rebecca Hale Living Trust. Richard's signature, mine, the date, the notary's stamp, the trustee designation, a map of our intentions, a future we had written when we still believed futures could be scheduled. I turned pages slowly, letting the kind paper rasp calm me. Title to the lodge, properly vested in the trust. Successor trustee, me. Authority, clear. Borrower, not applicable. Co-grantor, Richard Hale. Interests merged on death by design. No ambiguity. I could almost hear Richard, his voice steady as a plumb line, saying, "If something happens to me, I want you protected." The kettle started to whisper. I poured the water into the chipped cup and watched steam rise in a small, faithful column. I didn't drink it. I set the cup beside the trust binder as if the heat could warm ink. My phone lit up with a text from Daniel. One line, no greeting. "We're moving in next weekend. Don't come back." I stared until the letters blurred. Humiliation lifted its hand, but it didn't land. Grief tried next, the kind that makes your chest feel hollowed with a blunt spoon. Under both, something stronger moved, a current under wreckage. I reached for the cup, traced the fault line with my thumb. Richard never replaced it, even when I offered. "A crack doesn't mean it's broken," he told me. "It means it survived." I have survived many things. A lean marriage year when the checkbook felt like a dare. A son's adolescence that sounded like doors slamming. Chemo, 2 winters of it, when I learned how to sit perfectly still and hold a man's hand without asking his body for promises it couldn't keep. Maybe this was just another version of the lesson. You can be soft and still say no. I opened a second folder. The one we used to joke was my ledger of love. Tuition statements, the kind with micro print and cheerful headers. Receipts from a wedding venue with chandeliers, paid in full before anyone asked. A promissory note for a used SUV I signed when Daniel's car died in a snowstorm. A wire transfer to secure a condo when a landlord sold out from under them. Money is a language, and I had spoken it fluently for years. But there is a difference between a vow and a habit. Somewhere along the way, my yes had become Daniel's expectation. An expectation is a quiet thief. The clock above the stove clicked from 8:59 to 9 saan, the sound small and righteous. I closed the ledger folder, set it aside, and pulled the trust binder back toward me. Every line I read was a small breath I did not realize I had been holding. The law is not warmth, I know that, but it is a sturdy coat in weather like this. My mind reached for a name before my mouth did. Margaret Cole. We met in college when cafeteria coffee tasted like penance. She passed the bar because she studied as if sunlight were rationed, and she laughs like someone who remembers what life is for. When Richard and I set up the trust, she shepherded us through questions we didn't want to ask. Who will sign if you can't? What do you want to happen if there's pressure? She's the person you call when your heartbeat needs a spine. I took a pad and wrote a list. Writing makes a thought behave. Call Margaret at 8 a.m. sharp. Certification of trust. Memorandum to county. Certified letters, Daniel, Lydia, Charles, Elaine. No trespass notice. Log every text, every call. Do not explain. Do not defend. Repeat the sentence. The sentence formed itself. I practiced it out loud, quietly, to the hum of the refrigerator. I love you. The answer is no. This is trust property. I will not discuss it further. The words felt odd in my mouth, bare, almost crude. I said them again, slower. The second time they fit better, like shoes you forgot you owned. My phone rang. Daniel. I let it buzz once, twice. On the third ring I answered because I am still a mother, and mothers are built to hope our children will choose the right tone if we just give them one more minute. He started in fast, voice clipped with certainty. We're moving in Saturday, Mom. You hardly go up there anyway. Lydia's parents need a place. It's common sense. He said common sense, the way a man says invoice, as if fairness could be itemized. I looked at the binder while he spoke. I let my eyes land on the line that named me trustee. When he paused for breath, I set my voice down like a level on a board. Daniel, you don't own what you didn't build. The lodge is in trust. It's mine to manage. The answer is no. He went quiet, then pivoted like he always does when logic blocks him. Dad would have wanted us to use it. Family comes first. Heat rose in my throat, but I kept my tone even. Do not speak for your father. Silence, thick, uncomfortable. Then came the word that used to undo me. Selfish. It landed with less force than he intended. I gave you college. I paid your deposit when you were drowning, I said. I did those things because I love you. Love is not a license to take. He tried the last weapon, exile. If you fight this, don't expect to see us. No holidays, no grandkids, nothing. For a long time, that threat kept me soft. Tonight it sounded like what it is, blackmail, with ribbons on it. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, not because I needed to hear him better, but because I wanted him to hear me perfectly. That's your choice, not mine. And then, for the first time in our life together, I ended the call before he did. My finger on the red button felt like a signature. I set the phone face down and waited for my heart to gallop. It didn't. The house made its familiar night sounds, the modest breath of the furnace, the patient tick of the wall clock, the settling creak of wood that has learned how to carry weight. I rinsed the cup, dried it with the dish towel Richard never managed to hang straight, and put it back on the top shelf. You build steadiness with small motions. In the study, I flicked on the lamp. Richard's books still lined the shelves, carpentry manuals with his neat pencil notes in the margins, a dog-eared copy of Robert Frost, a field guide to Colorado birds he never used because he preferred asking the sky directly. I touched the spines the way you touch shoulders in a church aisle, quick, reverent, on my way to the front. I took the trust binder with me to the armchair he favored for Sunday papers, but I did not sit in it. I've never sat in it since he died. I consider it a kind of altar, the only one I keep. Back in the kitchen, I made a second list labeled House, not the Denver one, the Lodge, cameras, motion sensors, Exterior strobes, interior audio with civil statute reference, a sign for the porch, private trust property. So deputies wouldn't have to guess if it came to that. Not a haunted house, just a house with a spine. I stood at the sink and looked out into the dark. Streetlight turned the frost on the neighbor's roof into shy glitter. Somewhere, a dog barked twice, then remembered it had nothing urgent to add. I pressed my palm against the cool window pane and promised myself 2 things. First, I would not let them turn me into a woman whose boundaries could be talked down with volume. Second, if I had to use the law, I would wield it gently but without apology, the way you carry a flag at half-mast, sorrow and honor at once. I washed the cup once more, no reason, just devotion, and set it beside the binder so steam could soften the edges of fear. The air around me felt different, like a room after a storm when the pressure finally falls. The dignity of paperwork is a strange sort of comfort, but it is comfort all the same. I turned off the lights, checked the lock, and climbed the stairs, the old boards speaking in their alphabet of creaks. In bed, I lay on my back and watched the faint pattern of winter tree branches wobble on the ceiling. Grief wakes you early. Resolve puts you to sleep. When morning came, I rose before the alarm. I made tea, watered the basil, and wrote my final note in neat block letters, so I couldn't pretend later I hadn't meant it. Call Margaret, bring binder, bring cup. I slipped both into my tote and stood at the door with my hand on the knob, the way people do when they can feel a day about to move the furniture inside them. I was done believing that quiet was the same as surrender. Today my quiet would have teeth, and by nightfall, the first person to hear them wouldn't be me. The next morning I woke before dawn, the sky outside still heavy with the gray that comes just before light. Grief wakes you early, but so does resolve. I dress simply, wool slacks, a cardigan Richard once said made me look steady as a lighthouse, and packed my tote. Into it went the trust binder, neatly stacked and tabbed, and Richard's chipped cup, wrapped carefully in a scarf. I didn't need the cup for legal proof, but I needed it for me. By 8 o'clock, I was parked outside Margaret Cole's office, a modest brick building on Colfax Avenue that looked more like a library than a law firm. I'd been there many times before, but never with my heart pounding quite this way. Margaret and I had been friends since our college days. We survived cafeteria coffee and first heartbreaks together. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. I held her firstborn the day he arrived. Over the years, I'd seen her warmth in friendship and her precision in court. If Richard had steel in his hands, Margaret had it in her mind. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon polish. A tired ficus leaned toward the window. Magazines lay stacked on a side table, issues no one ever opened anymore. I sat with my tote at my feet and tried to breathe evenly. My palms were damp despite the chill. When Margaret opened her office door, she smiled. Not the kind of smile that erases worry, but the kind that steadies it. "Becca," she said, ushering me inside. "Let's see what we're working with." Her office was lined with books in neat rows, titles stamped in gold, their spines softened by years of use. A mahogany desk held only a lamp, a notepad, and 2 pens laid parallel. She gestured to the chair across from her. I sat and carefully placed the binder on the desk, then unwrapped the scarf and set the chipped cup beside it. Margaret's eyes flicked to it, softened, but she said nothing. She knew what it meant. I opened the binder to the trust tab. My hands trembled slightly, but the pages lay flat, obedient. Margaret put on her reading glasses, slid the binder toward her, and began to read. The room grew quiet except for the faint scratch of her pen as she made notes in the margin of her pad. Minutes passed, steady as a metronome. Finally, she looked up. "This trust is steel," she said. "Title to the lodge is properly vested. You're the trustee. That means you hold the authority to exclude anyone not designated as a guest. Richard's interest merged into yours when he passed. Clean, simple, unshakable." I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until I let it out in a slow rush. Relief moved through my ribs like a new breath of air. Margaret continued, her tone brisk but kind. "Here's what we'll do. First, we'll prepare a certification of trust, something short and clear you can present without disclosing every detail. Then we'll file a memorandum with the county clerk. That way, any officer who runs the parcel gets instant clarity. The lodge belongs to the Rebecca Hale Living Trust. After that, we'll send certified letters, return receipt requested, to Daniel, to Lydia, and to her parents, Charles and Elaine. These letters will state, in no uncertain terms, that they have no right to occupy the property. They'll also carry a formal trespass warning. If they attempt to enter again, you'll have grounds for criminal trespass charges." Her pen moved briskly, underlining each step. "You will not change locks while anyone is inside. You will not touch their property if they leave any behind. We stay immaculate, so they can't claim harassment. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes." "Good." She closed the binder gently, patted the cover like a doctor might close a chart after a diagnosis. Then she leaned back in her chair and studied me, not as a lawyer now, but as a friend who had walked beside me through seasons of joy and grief. "The law will hold," she said firmly, "but the law is not where Daniel will fight you. He will fight here." She tapped her hand against her chest. "He will say you are alone. He will say you are choosing strangers over family. He will mention holidays, future grandchildren. He will try to make your heart override your signature." I stared at my hands folded in my lap. They were steady, but my throat was not. "What do I say when he does that?" "You say it once, then you say it again as many times as needed." Her voice was calm, deliberate. "You say, 'I love you.' The answer is no. This property is trust property. I will not discuss it further. Repeat the sentence. Do not explain. Do not defend. Do not bargain." Her eyes held mine. Silence is not surrender if it protects a boundary. It is a tool. Use it. The words sank deep, heavier than law, heavier than paperwork. Silence as a tool. I'd always used silence to avoid conflict, but what if silence could become a shield instead of a wound? Margaret flipped to another tab, her voice brisk again. "We'll also create a log. Every text, every voicemail, every visit. Record it. Dates, times, exact words. If they show up again, call the sheriff. Then call me and Becca." Her tone softened. "If you feel yourself weakening, call me before you call anyone else." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I will." "Good." She removed her glasses and set them down. Grief rewires us. It makes us think saying yes is the only way to keep people close. But proximity purchased by surrender isn't closeness. It's control. Her words landed with a thud, sharp and true. I thought of Richard's voice teasing me after I signed yet another check for Daniel. "You spoil him, Becca." Back then I called it love. Maybe I still did. But maybe Margaret was right. Maybe love needed a line. She pulled a stack of papers from the printer, slid them across the desk. "Sign here to authorize me to act on behalf of the trust with third parties. I'll file today. By week's end, the record will be public. Post a sign at the lodge. Private property, trust estate. No trespassing under Colorado revised statute. It isn't legally required, but it helps deputies." My hand didn't tremble as I signed. The pen scratched steady. Each stroke felt like a plank laid down across a ravine. Margaret gathered the copies, slid them into a folder, then looked at me one more time. One last thing. Expect a performance. When people lose leverage, they raise volume. Don't mistake volume for authority. I exhaled a small laugh, humorless but relieved. I've heard plenty of volume. And you're still here, she said. Bring Richard's cup when you need courage, the one you think I don't know about. I blinked. She must have noticed it years ago at my house. I nodded. It helps. She walked me to the door. Her last words followed me into the hall like a benediction. You are not cruel, Becca. You are clear, and there is a difference. Outside, the Denver sky had opened into a pale blue that looked almost tender. I tightened the strap of my tote, felt the solid weight of the binder and the cup inside. For the first time in days, my steps felt rooted. But as I reached my car, another thought rose, sharp and unsettling. Daniel didn't know about the trust yet. When he did, he wouldn't simply vanish, and that meant the real storm hadn't even started. I drove back from Margaret's office with the trust binder buckled into the passenger seat, as though it were a living passenger riding shotgun. The cracked cup sat wrapped in its scarf inside my tote, silent, steady. The traffic hummed around me, but I hardly noticed the other cars. All I could hear were Margaret's words echoing in my head. The law will hold, but Daniel will fight in your chest. That sentence sat heavy and true. Back in my Denver house, I set the binder on the kitchen table, right beside Richard's framed photo. His easy grin stared back at me from the day we finished the lodge porch, sawdust still clinging to his shirt. We did it, Becca, he had said then, pride glowing in his eyes. I touched the frame lightly, then turned to the work at hand. I made tea in the chipped cup, not because I was thirsty, but because ritual steadies me. Steam curled upward, soft as breath. I sat in Richard's old chair, flipping open the binder to the certification page Margaret had marked. One by one, I reread the trust provisions, the signatures, the stamps. Each page was a brick in a wall I hadn't realized I was building. But Margaret was right. Paper could shield the house. It could not shield my heart. I stared at the phone lying face down on the table. No calls from Daniel yet, but I knew they would come. And when they did, they wouldn't be quiet. He had Lydia's persuasion and her parents' entitlement at his back. They'd already spoken once as if the porch were theirs. They would not stop there. I reached for my tablet almost without thinking. Last year, after a string of break-ins up near Aspen, I'd had a small camera system installed at the lodge. Mostly I wanted to catch raccoons raiding the garbage cans. But tonight, I opened the feed with new intent. The screen flickered. Then, there it was, the familiar living room of the lodge, grainy but clear enough. My breath caught when I saw figures moving across the floor. Daniel paced near the stone fireplace, hands slicing the air as he spoke. Lydia sat on the sofa, one leg tucked beneath her, her face sharp with determination. Charles leaned against the porch rail visible through the window, while Elaine perched primly on the edge of a chair, her pearls glowing faintly even in the dim light. I turned up the volume just enough. Their voices came through, thin but sharp. They have nowhere else to go, Daniel, Lydia pressed, her tone clipped. My parents lost their house. They can't afford rent in the city. This lodge is sitting empty. It's selfish for her to keep it locked up when people we love are desperate. Daniel raked a hand through his hair. I know, but this isn't the way. She'll fight us. She won't, Lydia snapped back. She never does. Think about it. College tuition. She paid without blinking. Our wedding? She signed every check. The car, the condo, the deposit. Everything. She's trained us to expect yes. She doesn't know how to say no. My stomach clenched. Trained us to expect. That was what my giving had become? Not love, Not generosity, training, conditioning. Charles's voice rumbled low. The house is too much for one woman alone. It makes sense to pass it where it will be used. Elaine added softly, she's a widow, alone. She won't risk losing you, Daniel. You're all she has. She'll swallow her pride. The words cut sharper than I could have imagined. Widow, alone, pride. As if my entire life could be reduced to a set of weaknesses waiting to be exploited. Daniel stopped pacing. His shoulders sagged as he lowered himself onto the sofa beside Lydia. His voice dropped, nearly swallowed by the crackle of the fire. What if she calls a lawyer? What if she locks us out? She won't, Lydia said firmly, almost with a smirk. She doesn't think that way. She thinks family first, even if it kills her inside. We just need to be firm. Tell her it's permanent. My parents deserve this. She'll understand eventually. I wanted to shout at the screen, to remind them who had written the checks, who had built the beams, who had carried Richard's weight through chemo and grief. But the camera only listened. Daniel rubbed his face, his voice breaking slightly. She'll hate me if we do this. Lydia placed a hand on his arm. Not if you frame it as helping. We're giving my parents stability. Your mom has more than she needs. She'll get over it. The silence that followed on the feed seemed louder than the words. My son leaned back, staring into the fire. His jaw was tight, his eyes restless, his guilt clear even across pixels. Lydia leaned closer, whispering something I couldn't catch. Charles looked away. Elaine adjusted her pearls. I closed the tablet slowly, setting it down as though it burned. For a long moment the kitchen was silent except for the steady tick of the wall clock. I stared at the chipped cup on the table, steam fading. Richard's words came back to me. A crack doesn't mean it's broken. It just means it survived. Maybe I had spoiled Daniel. Maybe every check, every yes had paved the road to this betrayal. But Lydia's words rang truer than she knew. They thought compassion meant surrender. They thought widowhood meant weakness. They thought silence meant defeat. They were wrong, because silence could also mean strategy. And this time my silence would not be the absence of fight. It would be the shape of my resistance. I reached for the trust binder, placed my hand flat on the embossed cover. Paper and ink, signatures and seals, they would hold in court. But what would hold in me? I closed my eyes and breathed deep. Margaret's voice returned. Say it once. Repeat it. Do not defend. Do not bargain. Silence is not surrender if it protects a boundary. I traced the crack on the cup with my fingertip, the thin scar running from lip to base. Richard had been right. Survival leaves marks, but marks can harden into strength. That night, as the house settled into its usual creaks and sighs, I felt something shift inside me, not loud, not dramatic, just steady, like roots gripping deeper. I had seen their plan. I had heard their certainty. And now, for the first time, I knew exactly how wrong they were. Because the next time they tried to step foot inside my lodge, it would not be an empty widow they met. It would be a house awake, and a mother who had finally learned to say no. The following Saturday, the sky over Aspen carried that brittle blue that only comes in early spring. Sharp, almost too clear, as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. From my kitchen in Denver, I watched the lodge camera feeds on my tablet. The images were steady, crisp. The gravel drive, the cedar porch, the living room where Richard's chair still sat angled toward the window. I sipped tea from the chipped cup, my hands calm though my chest thudded with a rhythm that felt like drums echoing off canyon walls. At 1:57 p.m., the driveway camera lit up. A dark SUV rolled into view, pine branches shivering in its wake. The hatch opened, and there was Daniel, moving with that swagger I recognized all too well, the careless stride of someone convinced he already owned the ground he was walking on. Behind him, Lydia stepped out in a tailored coat, sunglasses perched high in her hair, her voice sharp as she barked small commands. "Bring the big one first, Daniel. Set it inside." Her parents emerged more slowly. Charles dragged 2 rolling suitcases across the gravel, shoulders squared as if to stake a claim. Elaine clutched a floral overnight bag, her lips pressed into a firm line. She glanced around the porch like a queen surveying her new estate. I set the cup down carefully and leaned closer to the screen. My pulse was steady, not frantic. This was the moment I had prepared for. The 4 of them mounted the porch steps together. Daniel grabbed the doorknob. That was the trigger. The porch lights snapped into strobe, bursting in harsh red and blue flashes that ricocheted across the cedar boards. Inside, the entryway fixtures erupted too, alternating white and amber, bright enough to sting the eyes. Charles froze mid-step. Elaine let out a startled gasp, clutching her pearls so tightly the strand tilted sideways. Then the voice activated, calm but firm, threaded through every speaker. "Attention! Unauthorized entry. Colorado Revised Statute 184502. Criminal trespass. Leave immediately." Elaine screamed, stumbling back into Charles's arm. Her bag slipped from her hand and spilled across the porch, a scarf fluttering down the steps. Daniel snapped his head toward the ceiling speaker, his face hard. "Ignore it. It's just her scare tactic." He shoved the door open anyway, dragging the largest suitcase inside. The cameras followed him into the living room. That was when the faucets roared. Water burst from the kitchen sink, splashing stainless steel with startling force. Upstairs, the projector flickered to life, casting the tall, shifting shadow of a man pacing along the landing. Footsteps echoed through hidden speakers, slow and deliberate, as though someone unseen was climbing the stairs. Elaine clutched Charles's sleeve, her face white. "Charles, someone's upstairs." Charles squinted, trying to stay composed, but even his jaw slackened. "There's no one. Don't panic." Daniel turned toward them, voice rising, a brittle edge beneath his bravado. "It's all staged. She's bluffing. Just bring the rest of the bags." Yet even as he spoke, his own eyes flickered once toward the ceiling, betraying unease. Lydia's lips pressed into a tight line, her phone already in her hand. "Call the police," she hissed. "Right now." Through the feed, I watched Daniel jab at his phone, muttering curses under his breath. Minutes later, headlights washed across the drive. A county patrol car rolled in, lights spinning, sirens silent. 2 deputies stepped out, their boots crunching gravel. Their hands rested lightly on holsters as they scanned the scene. I sat straighter at my kitchen table, the chipped cup warm beneath my palm. This was the moment Margaret had prepared me for. The deputies spoke first to Daniel, who launched into a rapid-fire explanation, gesturing wildly toward the house. Lydia chimed in, her voice high and defensive. Charles stood stiff beside Elaine, who trembled visibly, whispering about voices in the walls. Finally, one deputy raised his hand, commanding silence. He asked for documentation. Daniel produced nothing but bluster. Lydia waved her phone like proof, but no paper appeared. The deputy stepped to the porch and knocked firmly on the door. At Margaret's instruction, Ethan had provided the sheriff's office with remote access to the system. At the officer's signal, the strobes ceased, the faucets hushed, the shadow vanished. The house looked once again like what it was, a mountain retreat, calm and orderly. The officer disappeared inside for a brief inspection, then returned shaking his head. House is secured, nothing illegal. Smart system doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Daniel stepped forward, his voice sharp, desperate. "But it's ours. My mom barely uses it. We're entitled—" "Stop." The deputy's voice cut through like a blade. He unfolded a document from his clipboard, a crisp copy of the memorandum Margaret had filed days earlier. His tone was clipped, final. "This property is held in trust under the Rebecca Hale Living Trust. Sole trustee authority. No transfer. No ambiguity. You have no claim. Any further attempt to enter without permission will be treated as criminal trespass." The words rang louder than any siren. Daniel's mouth opened, then shut again. Lydia went pale, her nails digging into her palm. Charles looked down at the suitcases he had dragged onto the porch. Elaine buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing softly. The second deputy stepped closer to Daniel, his voice lower, meant only for him but caught by the microphone feed. "Son, if you push this any further, you're not just risking embarrassment. You're risking charges, and trust me, you don't want that." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Then Daniel yanked the suitcase back across the porch, muttering curses. He avoided the cameras, avoided the deputy's eyes. Lydia tugged her coat tighter, her mouth pinched thin. Charles lifted Elaine's bag, shaking his head. Together they shuffled toward the SUV, their movements no longer triumphant but hollow. As they loaded the last suitcase, one deputy glanced up at the porch light, the one aimed straight at my camera. He spoke softly, almost as if he knew I was listening. "Ma'am, you've done everything right. Most people don't." The sentence struck me harder than any gavel could have. Recognition, not pity. Affirmation from the world outside my grief. I leaned back in my chair, fingers tightening around the chipped cup. For the first time in weeks, the tremor in my chest eased. The house had defended itself. The law had spoken for me. On the screen, the SUV pulled away, its taillights bleeding red into the trees. The gravel drive settled back into stillness. But as I stared at the empty porch, a chill ran through me. Daniel's face in that last moment wasn't just defeat. It was calculation. And that meant the battle was far from over. The lodge camera feeds went still again, a quiet tableau of cedar, glass, and snow-bright sky. I sat at my kitchen table in Denver with the chipped cup warming my palms and let the silence prove what it always does when you give it enough room. The world can be loud, but truth doesn't need volume. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, there was a softness to the relief, like a quilt pulled up to the chin after a long day. The deputies had done their job. The memorandum had done its job. The house had done its job. Now I had to do mine. I rinsed the cup, set it to dry on the towel Richard never hung straight, and opened my notebook. On one side of the page I wrote law. On the other, heart. Under law, I copied the sentence Margaret had given me, certification filed, trespass notice in effect. Under heart, I wrote a gentler one, breathe. You kept your promise to yourself. I have learned that it matters to give your courage something to read. For an hour I moved through small tasks, the ordinary stitches that keep a life from unraveling. Watering basil, straightening the throw on the sofa, folding dish towels the way my mother did. Edges meeting in the middle, then once more, clean. When the kettle ticked, I poured a second cup of tea and carried it to the living room. Richard's chair faced the window the way he left it. I sat across from it, not in it, because some seats are altars, and I have always believed you don't sit on the place where you pray. The phone broke the quiet. Daniel. I let it ring 3 times and answered on the 4th. Mom. His voice was stripped of the swagger I'd heard on the porch at Aspen, but it carried something else now, heat under ice. We just left the lodge. I know, I said, because I did. I watched from here. You set us up, he snapped. You humiliated us. You made my in-laws look like criminals. No, I said, keeping my tone level, the way Margaret taught me. You put yourselves in a position where the law had to speak. You barely go up there, he pressed, his words climbing faster. It's selfish to keep a place like that empty. We had a plan. You ruined it. There it was, selfish, the word that used to undo me. I let it pass through me like weather and kept my sentence steady. I love you. The answer is no. The lodge is trust property. I will not discuss it further. There was a long exhale on the line, the sound people make when they've reached for the old lever and found it sealed. Fine, he said. Then here's mine. If you don't help us, don't expect to see us. No holidays, no birthdays, no grandkids, nothing. The threat slid into the room like a draft under a door. It used to chill me to the bone. Tonight it moved my napkin, hardly more. That's your choice, I said, not unkindly. But don't dress it up as mine. Silence stretched, taut as wire. I pictured him in the SUV, Lydia beside him with her mouth pinched tight, her parents in the back clinging to their embarrassment like a shawl. He tried one more angle. Dad would. Daniel. I didn't raise my voice, but I set it down firmly. Do not speak for your father. The line went quiet again, and for a moment I heard only the small metronome of my wall clock and my own breath. Then he said quieter, I thought you'd always choose me. I did, I answered, surprised by the calm in my chest. For years I chose you with checks and favors and 1,000 little yeses. But love without a line isn't love. It's fear. I'm done with fear. He swore softly, at the air, at me, at the shape of a life that had stopped bending. You'll regret this, he said, and hung up. The room did not tilt. The ceiling did not lower. I set the phone face down and waited for the ache to arrive with its usual entourage of second guesses. It didn't. Something else came instead. Clean sorrow, honest as rain. I let it sit beside me on the couch and behave. Dusk found the window glass and pressed its cool face there. I turned on the small lamp that makes a honeyed circle on my rug and opened the drawer where we keep our letters. There was one to write, and I didn't want to wait any more. Richard, I began, because that is the way I know how to speak when I need to be the kind of brave that doesn't crack. The deputies read our names where they belong. The porch is still cedar and air. The chair still faces morning. I used the law today, and it did not make me hard. It made me clear. I wrote about the way Daniel had looked at the camera, not defeated but calculating, and how I recognized that look from the nights when he was small and planning to sneak another cookie. I wrote that I had said no, and the world had not ended. I wrote the sentence again because it helps to see your spine in ink. I love you. The answer is no. This is trust property. I will not discuss it further. When I finished, I slid the page into the old album we filled with lodge photos, crooked fence posts, a first snow on the porch railing, the day we hung the tin star above the door. The paper rasped against paper, a sound like steady breathing. I slept well for the first time in weeks. The knock came 2 evenings later, sharp and insistent, the kind that carries an argument before a mouth opens. I stood on the other side of my own front door and let my hand rest on the knob until my pulse slowed into something useful. When I opened it, Daniel was there with Lydia at his shoulder. No pearls for her tonight, no gloss, just a tight jaw and a phone clutched like a warrant. We need to talk, he said, stepping onto the threshold as if inches equaled ownership. I stepped back 1 pace, enough to be polite, not enough to invite. Talking is fine. He didn't waste any of it. Either you stop this or we're done. You think a piece of paper can keep us out of a family home? You think a deputy's lecture changes what's right? I looked at Lydia then. Her eyes were hot, rimmed with the sting of a public embarrassment. We're not asking for charity, she said, crisp as ice. We're asking for stability. My parents are drowning. Your lodge sits empty. Any decent person would. Ask, I said gently. She blinked. What? Ask, I repeated. You marched in and declared. You held my love hostage to your urgency. That isn't asking. That's ransom. Color rose to her cheeks. Daniel's shoulders squared, his hands opening and closing like he was catching and releasing the same bad idea. We're family, he said. Family shares. Family doesn't take property hostage, I answered, and watched the words land. They do not bruise, they mark. He took one more step forward. I raised a palm, not up, not out, just enough to show him the air where my line lived. I love you, I said. The answer is no. The lodge is trust property. I will not discuss it further. He laughed once, a sound with no mirth in it. You sound like a recording. That's the point, I said. Recordings don't get rattled. For a second, I saw the boy under the man, the one who used to look at me from a top bunk after a nightmare and ask if the dark could be folded smaller. Then I saw the man who had tried to fold me instead. Two truths, squinting at each other across a hallway. Lydia tugged at his sleeve. Let's go, she said through her teeth. This is pointless. He didn't move. He looked at me as if there might still be a hidden lever in my chest he could pull if he just watched long enough. There wasn't. Not anymore. You'll call me when you come to your senses, he said, defaulting to bravado because he had nothing else left to spend. I'll answer when you come to mine, I said, and let the quiet fill the doorway between us. He turned. The evening swallowed their footsteps the way neighborhoods do when they are done with a scene. I closed the door, gently, not as a gavel, but as a benediction, and turned the deadbolt, not because I was afraid, but because a door deserves to know whom it serves. In the kitchen, I set the kettle on and took down the chipped cup. Steam rose. The crack along the rim caught the light like a vein of ore, proof that something broken can still carry heat. I wrote 2 more lines in my notebook under heart, held the threshold, spoke the sentence. Under law, I added 1 more. Ask Margaret about the step we discussed. Future-proofing. Future-proofing. Margaret had said it in passing as we stood by her office door, a small thought cut from heavier cloth. If you want to end the tug-of-war entirely, she'd said, there are ways to place the lodge where emotion can't reach it, while keeping your lifetime rights intact. At the time, I hadn't been ready. Tonight the word felt like a key pressed into my palm. The kettle clicked off. The house breathed its small, satisfied sigh. I set the cup down on the table and watched the steam curl into the lamplight. Somewhere down the block a car door thumped, then a voice said goodnight and meant it. I closed my eyes and pictured the porch at Aspen. Cedar arms smooth under my hands, the tin star above the door, the lake beneath the hill holding sky like a kept promise. I had held. The law had held. The house had held. Tomorrow I would ask Margaret to make sure none of us ever had to hold like this again, at least not over the same door. The sky over Denver that morning was the color of pewter, pale and metallic, with a light dusting of snow turning every parked car into a sculpture. I parked outside Margaret's office with a leather folder under my arm, the folder that carried the deed, the trust, the tax receipts, all the papers that had whispered stronger than Daniel's shouting. My boots crunched on the salted walkway. For the first time in months, my steps felt less like hesitation and more like direction. Margaret's brass nameplate gleamed by the door. Margaret Cole, attorney at law. She had been my friend for over 40 years, but today I needed her not as Margaret, the woman who once brought me soup when Richard started chemo, but as Margaret, the scalpel. Inside, her office smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. She looked up from her desk, glasses halfway down her nose, and smiled that small, steady smile I had come to trust. "Rebecca," she said, standing, "are you ready?" I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "Yes. I don't want to live waiting for the next knock." She gestured toward the long conference table, where a neat stack of papers sat clipped and tabbed in yellow. At the top was the gift deed transferring the lodge to the Hope Horizon Foundation, the nonprofit that builds retreats for veterans and their families. Just below it, in careful legal language, was the clause that mattered most to me: life estate retained by grantor. As long as I lived, the lodge would still be mine to use, mine to breathe in, mine to remember Richard. Margaret sat across from me, her hands folded. "Once you sign, Rebecca, the tug of war ends. No argument, no manipulation can touch it. The lodge is protected. The foundation receives ownership, but your right to use it lasts your lifetime." I touched the pen, the weight of it more than metal. Good. This isn't losing the lodge. This is choosing where it will live when I no longer do. Her eyes softened, though her voice stayed brisk. "That's the spirit of this. You're not surrendering. You're directing." The first signature trembled slightly, but by the third my hand was steady. Each stroke of ink lifted a little weight from my ribs. The donative intent letter, the certification of trust, the memorandum for the county records. I signed them all. Finally, Margaret pointed to the line beneath the life estate clause. "This one ensures your access. No one, not even your son, can interfere." I signed, then sat back, letting the silence of the room settle over me like a quilt. Margaret gathered the papers, stacking them neatly. "It's done," she said. "By the end of the week, the record will be public. If Daniel or Lydia consult another lawyer, they'll run into a wall as hard as granite. Family drama won't bend this law." Relief moved through me like a clean breath. Not joy exactly, but certainty. The kind of certainty you can lean your full weight on without fear of collapse. I reached into my tote and pulled out the chipped ceramic cup. I hadn't planned to, but my fingers found it like a talisman. I set it gently on the table. This cup reminds me what can break and still hold together. The lodge is like that. It may have been cracked by betrayal, but now it's sealed in a way even my son can't undo. Margaret looked at it, then at me. "That's a powerful way to see it." I lifted the cup again, cradling it. "Richard used to say a home isn't just where you live, it's what you protect. Today, I've protected it. Not for Daniel, not even for me, but for the families who will need it after I'm gone." She slid the last folder across the table. "These are your copies. Keep them safe. They're your armor now." I tucked them carefully into my tote. My legs felt rooted again, as though the ground had agreed to hold me. Outside, the wind was sharp but clean, pressing against my coat as if to test my new steadiness. For months, I had believed my choices were only fight or surrender. Today, I understood there was a third path, to redefine the terms entirely. They thought they could erase me from my own property. Instead, I had written myself into its future with ink no storm could wash away. When I returned home, the house welcomed me with its familiar creaks and sighs. I placed the folder in my study drawer, locked it, and set the chipped cup on the side table by Richard's photo. His grin in that picture had always looked like sunlight caught mid-laugh. "It's safe now," I whispered, as though he could hear me. "They can't touch it." The kettle clicked on the stove. The scent of lavender cleaner lingered faintly in the hall. I moved slowly through the rooms, touching surfaces not as chores, but as witnesses. The cool porcelain of the sink, the warm wood of the banister, the faded quilt folded neatly at the couch's edge. All of it seemed steadier now, anchored by the certainty of law and ink. For dinner, I made a simple stew, potatoes, carrots, onions. Food that didn't need ceremony, only heat. I ate it by lamplight, the soft glow pooling on the table, while outside the city exhaled under winter dusk. Each spoonful felt like something earned, not stolen. Later, I pulled the old album from the closet, the one where I had tucked my letter to Richard. I slipped today's deed copy inside its back cover, letting the paper rest among cedar-scented photographs. My handwriting, my signature, the seal of the county, proof that love can take the form of boundary. It was close to 10 when the knock came. 3 quick raps, too firm to be a neighbor, too restrained to be a stranger. I moved down the hall, every step measured, the weight of the day still solid in my chest. Through the glass pane I saw a figure hunched against the cold. No Lydia, no Charles or Elaine, just Daniel. His shoulders were tight, his jaw shadowed. His eyes, when they lifted to meet mine, carried not the smugness of the porch or the defiance of the phone call, but something rawer. I opened the door slowly. He didn't speak right away. His gaze slipped past me, catching on the chipped cup that sat on the table inside. I saw his throat work, as though the sight alone pressed words he couldn't swallow. "Mom," he finally said, his voice rough. "I thought you'd always choose me." I gripped the edge of the door, the wood warm beneath my palm. I had known this moment was coming. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was whether Daniel had come to fight, to plead, or to break the last bridge between us. And the answer to that would decide what kind of silence lived in my house from here on. He stood on my porch like a man who'd rehearsed 100 openings and trusted none of them. The cold had reddened his ears. His hands were jammed into his coat pockets as if to keep from reaching for the old levers. Guilt, volume, speed. "Mom," he said again. The word came out hoarse, smaller than his age. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside far enough to be hospitable, and not 1 inch more. He crossed the threshold and stopped in the entry, eyes landing on Richard's photo, then on the chipped cup resting by the lamp. He stared at the crack, as if it might offer him a line to read. "I heard you filed something," he began, forcing nonchalance that didn't fit his mouth. Lydia said, "A transfer? To some charity?" "Hope Horizon Foundation," I said. "They run retreats for veterans and their families. The lodge is theirs now. I kept a life estate. I'll use it while I'm here to use anything." He nodded once, a tight, pained motion. "So it's over." "The tug of war is," I said. "The rope isn't in the room anymore." He let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "You always did like your metaphors." "I like clarity," I answered. He took 2 steps toward the living room and stopped at the boundary of the rug, as if the pattern itself might be a line he needed to respect. "I thought you'd always choose me," he said softer. "I didn't think you'd lock it down like that." "I chose you for years," I said, my voice steady, with checks and favors and 1,000 small yeses. "That didn't teach you love. It taught you expectation. And when expectation doesn't get fed, it turns mean." His jaw worked. "I didn't mean to be mean." "I know," I said. "You meant to be first." We stood in the low lamplight with the quiet pressing gently against us. He looked older than he had on the porch at Aspen. Less lacquer, more human. "Lydia's folks," he said. "They really did lose the house. Her mom's health is Not great. I know, I said. None of that made the lodge theirs. He winced. I said things I shouldn't have. Yes, I said. I didn't cushion it. He lifted his eyes to mine, and for a moment the boy I raised moved behind the man he became, wide-eyed, ashamed, braced for a verdict. Are you going to forgive me? Forgiveness is a door I'll open when it's safe to leave it open, I said. Not because you demand it, not because I'm afraid, and not because I can't bear quiet. Because you start living different. How? The word almost broke. Stop treating love like leverage, I said. Start asking instead of declaring. When you fail, tell the truth, and not a story that makes someone else pay for it. Get a job that isn't pride in costume. Call your wife in the same tone you use with strangers you want to impress. And when you come to my threshold, come as a son, not as a claimant. He looked down at his shoes. That's a long list. It's a life, I said. The house breathed. Furnace, clock, the small domestic chorus that holds a room together. He glanced at the cup again. I remember Dad teasing you about that thing. Said it was a hazard. He said it survived a fall, I answered. He liked the proof. He smiled reluctantly, like someone tasting a fruit he'd spent years pretending he disliked.